The afternoon sun baked the auction yard in a dry, relentless heat. Dust swirled beneath the boots of disinterested buyers as they leaned on the split-rail fencing, arms folded, eyes squinting toward the holding pens. The air reeked of sweat, hay, and manure. Horses paced nervously, ears twitching. Some whinnied, some kicked, some stood perfectly still, resigned. But none paid attention to the frail shape tethered to the last post in the shade. He was small, too small. A donkey foal with trembling legs and eyes too big for his sunken face. His fur was patchy and dull, caked with dried mud and flecks of blood where flies had bitten into raw skin. His ribs pressed visibly against his sides, and his tail hung limp, barely swishing at the insects that clung to him. He didn't cry. He barely blinked. And when his turn came, no one even noticed. "Next one up," the auctioneer barked, flipping a page on his clipboard. He barely glanced at the foal before muttering, "Donkey colt, no tag, no record, no reserve. Starting bid, $1. A beat of silence followed, then laughter. $1? For that? A man jeered, spitting near his boot. "He won't live past the night," another chimed in. "Be doing him a favor putting him down." A third voice muttered, "Shouldn't even be here. Looks half dead." The foal tried to lift his head at the sound, but it drooped again, as if it were too heavy for his thin neck. A girl tugged at her father's sleeve, whispering something with wide, sad eyes. He shook his head, gently but firmly. No one raised a hand. No one bid. No one even looked twice. The auctioneer clicked his tongue. "All right then. No sale. Move him aside." Two handlers approached with a rope and a rough gesture, causing the foal to stumble sideways. He tried to resist, but his legs gave out, and he collapsed in a heap, legs folded awkwardly beneath him. That's when a voice, clear and quiet, rang through the air. "I'll take him." Everyone turned. The crowd shifted, murmuring. Near the edge of the fence stood an old woman, thin and upright, with silver hair coiled in a bun under a faded straw hat. Her boots were worn, but clean. Her eyes, a soft gray, looked past the handler straight at the collapsed foal. "You want that one?" the auctioneer said with disbelief. "Lady, you sure?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, that one." The handlers paused, glancing at each other. The crowd snickered. "You buying him for scrap?" One man asked with a scoff. The old woman stepped forward, unbothered. "His name is Eli." The auctioneer chuckled without humor. "He ain't got a name. He's got flies." "He has a name now," she replied, her voice firm. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. "Will this cover him?" The man shrugged. "Sure. He's yours." She walked toward the foal slowly, carefully. The noise of the crowd faded into the background. One step at a time, she closed the distance between them until she was close enough to kneel. Dust rose around her skirt as she settled beside him. His eyes barely moved at first, but then they found hers, dull, glassy brown locking onto soft, weathered gray. Her hand reached out, slow and gentle, brushing against the side of his jaw. He flinched once, then stilled. Her fingers, warm and deliberate, traced the edge of his face where a scar had formed beneath the fur. "It's all right," she whispered. "You're safe now." Someone coughed. A horse somewhere in the pens whinnied loudly, but neither the woman nor the foal looked away. His ears twitched slightly at the sound of her voice. With effort that seemed to drain the last of his strength, Eli shifted, pushed with his front legs, and tried to rise. He trembled, collapsed again, then tried once more. The crowd had gone silent. This time, with a wheeze and a grunt, he stood barely. His legs shook. His head dipped low. But he took a single step toward her, then another. Gasps rippled across the yard. The old woman opened her arms. His small body collapsed gently against her, head pressed into her chest, eyes closed. She held him like she had held her son once, long ago, when he returned from war, with shaking hands and empty eyes. Her hand cradled the back of the donkey's head, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. In the quiet that followed, someone whispered, "What's she gonna do with him?" Another voice answered, softer this time, "Maybe she just came to save something." A small breeze stirred the dust at their feet. The foal brayed, barely audible, more breath than sound. But it was a voice, a will, and it came from a place deeper than muscle or bone. The old woman closed her eyes. A single tear traced its way down her cheek. She stood slowly, supporting the foal's side as he leaned against her. Her hand never left him. Together, they moved past the crowd, which parted silently, allowing her to walk through untouched. Nobody laughed now. A few lowered their heads. Some turned away. One man wiped at his eyes without understanding why. As the woman and foal disappeared down the far path, the auctioneer looked down at his clipboard, then tossed it aside. The sun dipped lower behind the hills, and the air, though still hot, felt changed, if only for a moment. The old truck rattled down the gravel road, tires crunching against the stones as the sun bled across the sky in soft amber streaks. Dust clung to the back windows, and the bed of the truck creaked under the small weight of the foal wrapped in an old woolen blanket. His eyes fluttered open with each jolt, too weak to bray, too tired to resist. But he wasn't alone. In the passenger seat, the woman kept glancing at him through the mirror, one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other resting lightly on her lap, fingers twitching nervously, as if they remembered how to comfort, but hadn't done it in years. The house came into view at the end of the road, small, weathered, and nestled between two large cottonwoods that bent with age like guardians bowing in respect. The barn, red paint peeling in places, stood just beyond it. Fences leaned slightly, some broken rails still unrepaired. Yet the land breathed peace. She parked the truck and climbed out, her body stiff but steady. Without speaking, she lowered the tailgate and gently eased the foal onto a canvas stretcher. He didn't resist. His head lolled to the side as she carried him, step by careful step, toward the barn. The other animals, 2 goats, an old mule, and a hen that never left the fence post, watched silently as she passed. Inside the barn, the straw had already been laid, water prepared, a heating lamp lit, and hung above a bed of blankets. She placed him down, tucked the blanket tighter around his small frame, and knelt beside him. The barn creaked with the wind. Crickets chirped from beyond the walls. Stillness hung in the air like a question. "I used to be afraid of silence," she said softly, as though speaking to herself. "Now it's all I have." She brushed a hand over his ears, straightening the fur that had curled in knots. "Eli, that's who you are." He blinked slowly, his eyelids heavy, but the name echoed gently in the space between them. She repeated it, a little louder, a little more sure, like pressing it into the walls of the barn. That night, she slept beside him, not out of duty, but because she couldn't stand the idea of him waking up alone again. She brought her son's blanket from the chest at the foot of her bed, a patchy quilt stitched with tiny stars and initials faded by time. As she wrapped it around them both, her eyes lingered on the corner where his name had once been embroidered in gold thread. In the early hours, he whimpered. She awoke instantly, whispering his name, placing her palm against his side. His breathing steadied. Her heartbeat slowed, and in the fragile quiet before dawn, something in the air shifted, a kind of trust, delicate and new. Morning brought light through the barn slats. Dust motes floated in sunbeams. She filled a bottle with warm goat's milk, added a pinch of sugar, and carried it to him. At first, he didn't respond, but when she pressed the rubber nipple to his lips, his mouth twitched. He sipped, then again, and again. Her smile broke slowly across her face, uncertain at first, then real. Each day after, she repeated the ritual. Feedings, soft cloth baths, gentle massages along his legs. She read aloud from her son's old books, cowboy tales and adventure stories, her voice rough but full of life. She played music on the crackly old radio, humming along to melodies neither of them had heard in years. Eli began to move more, to lift his head without trembling. He took his first real step 3 days in, unsteady but determined. She clapped softly, not wanting to startle him. "Good boy," she whispered. "That's my brave Eli." The neighbors noticed. One stopped by with a bag of feed and a raised eyebrow. "Heard you picked up a ghost from the auction," he said, peering into the barn. She didn't look at him. "He's not a ghost. He's alive." He gave a skeptical grunt. "Barely. Don't get your hopes up." Another neighbor left a note in her mailbox. Asterisk donkeys aren't meant to be pets. Don't confuse mercy with hope. Asterisk. She burned it in the wood stove that evening. When the vet finally came, he frowned, examining Eli's spine, checking his eyes, his limbs. "He's malnourished. Weak. Possibly brain damaged from birth trauma," he said, not unkindly. "Might never grow full size. Won't be strong. Not much use, if I'm being honest." She met his eyes. "He doesn't need to be useful. He just needs to live." The vet hesitated, then nodded. "You're doing everything right. But prepare yourself." "I did that already," she said. "At the auction." After the vet left, she sat beside Eli again, stroking his fur. He was looking at her now, not just in reflex, but with recognition. His ears perked at her voice. His small tail flicked whenever she entered the barn. He was no longer just surviving. He was learning her rhythms, and she was learning his. One evening, as the sun dipped low and gold spilled over the field, she let him out of the barn for the first time. He hesitated at the doorway, then stepped onto the grass. He blinked at the open space, ears alert. Slowly, they walked together, her hand on his back, his head bobbing with every uncertain step. The sky burned orange, the cottonwoods rustled, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. They stopped near the old fence, where a single broken swing still hung from a tree branch. It hadn't moved in years. Wind caught it now, gently swaying back and forth. She spoke aloud, as if to the wind. "You would have liked him, son. He's stubborn, like you were. And he's got those same tired eyes. Like he's seen too much already." Eli rested his head against her leg. Her throat tightened, but she smiled. Not with grief, but with something warmer, fuller. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. Later that night, as she placed him back in the barn, Eli brayed softly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't strong. But it was a sound. His sound. She turned quickly. "You found your voice," she said, kneeling beside him. And though the moment was small, she felt it. It was the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. Tomorrow would bring questions, challenges, maybe more doubt. But tonight there was quiet. There was warmth. There was a donkey who had learned his name. And that was enough. The letter arrived on a damp morning in late spring, tucked among junk flyers and a seed catalog in her rusted mailbox. Its envelope was stiff, pale blue, and bore no return address, just her name in precise, unfamiliar script. She opened it with a knife at the kitchen table. Eli asleep by the hearth on an old wool rug, his breathing slow and even. The words inside were brief but weighted. Asterisk, "We believe you are in possession of a donkey foal marked by government property ID #4HM 8392. This animal may be subject to repossession. Further investigation pending." Asterisk. She read it 3 times. Each time, her jaw clenched tighter. Later that day, she stood outside the barn, arms folded, eyes scanning the sky as if the answer might fall from it. Eli was growing, still small for his age, but stronger. His coat had darkened, and his once wobbly steps now carried the beginnings of pride. Yet he still cried in his sleep, still clung to her shadow, still shivered when the wind howled too long. She thought about the faded brand behind his right ear, an odd mark she'd noticed weeks ago but dismissed as an old scar. Now, she traced it again with her thumb, more deliberately. The skin there felt slightly raised, like numbers beneath the fur. Her stomach turned. The next morning, a black SUV rolled up the long gravel road. 2 men stepped out, one in a sleek suit, the other in boots and a windbreaker. They looked out of place against the backdrop of sun-faded paint and squeaky barn doors. "You Eleanor Reed?" the suited one asked, offering no smile. "I am. We're here about the donkey," he said, motioning toward the barn. "There's been a mix-up." She didn't move. "He's not going anywhere." "I'm afraid this isn't a choice," he replied. This animal was part of a discontinued breeding program overseen by a federal partner. A rare endurance hybrid, desert-capable, low-maintenance. Not for civilian use. "He was left to die," she snapped. "Abandoned like garbage." There was an unauthorized disposal from one of our subcontractors, the second man said, voice quieter. We're just here to clean up the mistake. She looked at Eli then, who had stepped into the doorway of the barn, ears perked forward, eyes fixed on her. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He just stood there, watching. He's mine, she said. I named him. I fed him when he couldn't stand. I stayed with him through storms. You don't get to decide he's yours now. The men exchanged a look. The suited one pulled a card from his pocket and placed it on the fence post. We'll give you a few days. But understand, ma'am, this isn't personal. It's procedural. As the SUV disappeared down the road, she stood motionless, the card still fluttering in the breeze behind her. Eli took a hesitant step forward, brushing his nose against her side. That night, she sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by legal papers, old receipts, vet bills, and handwritten feeding charts. The lamp flickered as thunder rolled in the distance. She picked up a photograph of her son, young, smiling, in uniform, and held it to her chest. You would have fought for him too, she whispered. Wouldn't you? The next day, she drove into town. Her truck wheezed uphill as if protesting the climb, but she ignored it. She parked near the community center and walked straight into the office of David Monroe, the only lawyer in the county who still accepted handshakes over contracts. He listened quietly, brow furrowed, as she laid everything out. The letter, the visit, Eli's origin. When she finished, he sat back and rubbed his chin. They don't have a warrant. They have protocol. That's not the same thing. Will that stop them? She asked. Maybe not, but it gives us time. He made a few calls, filed a temporary hold, and advised her to prepare for attention. This kind of story doesn't stay small, he warned, especially not in a town like ours. He was right. Within a week, it was everywhere, first on the local radio, then in the town newspaper, and eventually online. Asterisk, widowed farmer battles government to keep rescued donkey. Asterisk, photos of Eli leaning into her shoulder ran with every article. Support came in unexpected forms. A teenage girl from the next county sent a hand-drawn picture of Eli with the caption asterisk, donkeys deserve families too. Asterisk, an old veteran mailed her a silver medal with a note that simply read, asterisk, for courage. Asterisk, the town vet publicly confirmed Eli's poor condition upon arrival, citing neglect and abandonment. Whatever he was bred for, he said at a council meeting. He was left to die. That woman saved his life. The pressure mounted. The men didn't return. A second letter arrived, vague and cautious, hinting that the agency had reevaluated the asset's significance. But she knew better than to rest easy. She continued to feed Eli, walk him through the fields, train him gently to respond to calls and signals. He followed her without need for a lead, stopped when she stopped, nuzzled her hand as if memorizing her scent. He was no longer the broken thing she'd rescued. He was something else now, still healing, still vulnerable, but proud, watchful. They had become mirrors. Both had been discarded. Both had learned to trust again. On the 50th day since the first letter, she received a call. We're withdrawing the claim, the voice said without ceremony. Too much noise. Too much attention. Consider it resolved. She didn't cry. She simply said, good. That evening, she poured herself a glass of tea, sat on the porch, and watched Eli roll in the dirt near the cottonwoods, kicking up clouds of gold in the sunset. The hens clucked from the fence. The mule brayed a low, lazy call. Eli paused, lifted his head, and stared toward her with a strange intensity. Come on, then, she called. He trotted over without hesitation, ears forward, tail swishing. She leaned down and kissed the top of his head. You're home now, she whispered. For good. The wind carried her words into the trees, and for the first time in her long memory, it felt like something had finally answered back. The autumn sun hung low, casting golden streaks across the fields as Eleanor leaned on the fence post, her elbows resting on the worn wood. The grass had turned a brittle brown, and the breeze carried the dry scent of harvest and wood smoke. Below her in the paddock, Eli moved with a confidence that had once seemed impossible. He was still small for his age, his gait still slightly uneven, But his eyes, those deep, expressive eyes, held something entirely new: certainty. Children were gathering near the barn, parents chatting in folding chairs beneath makeshift canopies. It was the town's annual fall gathering, resurrected by the community after years of neglect. This year it was different. This year, Eleanor had agreed to bring Eli into the spotlight. "You sure about this?" the mayor had asked weeks earlier. "He's just a donkey." "He's not just anything," she'd replied. "He's a story people need to remember." And so here they were. A small wooden platform had been built near the hay bales, decorated with orange ribbons and bunches of dry corn stalks. A chalkboard sign read, "Special presentation, 4 p.m. The donkey that defied the odds." Eleanor didn't care about the attention. She hadn't agreed for the sake of applause or headlines. She'd done it for Eli, for the quiet moment when a child might look at him and see more than an animal, might see hope. She walked to the paddock gate and gave a short whistle. Eli's ears flicked. He lifted his head, spotted her, and trotted over without hesitation. Dust rose beneath his hooves. The crowd turned as Eleanor led him forward with no rope, no bridle, just a soft voice and an open gate. The children drew closer, their eyes wide with curiosity. One little girl clutched a handmade flower crown in her hand, nervous but smiling. Eleanor gave her a nod. The girl stepped forward slowly and, after a moment of hesitation, reached up and placed the crown between Eli's ears. He didn't flinch. He leaned in gently, lowering his head to meet her reach. The girl giggled and stepped back. The crowd clapped. Eleanor stepped onto the platform with Eli standing beside her. She didn't hold a speech in her hand, never needed one. Her voice, though quiet, carried. "I was told once that Eli had no name, that he wasn't worth saving, that he wouldn't last the night." She glanced down at him. "But here he is." She looked back to the crowd, eyes lingering on the older faces, the children perched on hay bales, the ones who had sent her letters, drawn pictures, rallied behind her. Sometimes life hands us broken things. Sometimes those things are easy to throw away. But sometimes, she paused, running her fingers through Eli's mane, they just need someone to believe in them. There was no applause this time, just silence, still and full. Later, as the crowd dispersed and music filled the air, Eleanor wandered with Eli to the edge of the field, away from the noise. The sun had dipped behind the hill, and the light had taken on that rich, honeyed hue only October could bring. She sat beneath the cottonwood tree, the swing creaking gently beside her. Eli stood close, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Funny how things come around," she murmured. "A year ago, I thought I was done. I thought I'd buried every reason to keep going." She ran a hand along his neck. His breathing matched hers, slow, steady. "But you weren't just a rescue. You were a reminder." A car pulled up along the edge of the property. Eleanor squinted against the fading light. A young woman stepped out, familiar, though not from town. She carried a small notebook in her hand and approached with cautious steps. "Ms. Reed?" she asked. Eleanor stood slowly. "That's me." "I'm from a local journal," the woman said, holding up her notebook. "I've been following your story. I was wondering if I could speak with you." Eli stepped protectively between them. The woman smiled and waited. "What do you want to know?" Eleanor asked, her voice calm but wary. The woman glanced at the donkey, then back at Eleanor. "How did you know that he was worth saving?" Eleanor looked down at Eli. He lifted his head, meeting her gaze with that quiet, familiar steadiness. "I didn't," she said. "I just knew what it felt like not to be." The young woman swallowed and scribbled something in her notebook. Then she nodded, thanked her, and returned to her car. As the engine faded into the distance, Eleanor turned back toward the barn. She began walking, Eli following close. The porch light flickered on as they approached the house, casting a warm glow across the weathered boards. She paused at the steps. "I think we'll build a new fence next spring," she said aloud. "Give you more room. Maybe bring in another rescue. Someone else who needs a home." Eli brayed softly, his tail swishing. She smiled, not the sad kind, not the forced one either. It was the kind that took its time, the kind that didn't need an audience. Inside the barn, she laid out fresh straw, refilled the water, and set down his favorite feed with molasses drizzled on top. He nuzzled into it immediately, crunching noisily. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. She looked back at him, her once frail foal, now something stronger, steadier, whole. "Sleep well, Eli," she whispered. "You've earned it." She stepped into the night, stars blinking into view above her, the wind brushing through the tall grass. The world was quiet again, but it wasn't the empty kind of quiet. It was the kind that promised something more. And for the first time in a long time, Eleanor believed it.